I don't really know how to start shows.
Come on now, don't start liking me now.
So yeah, I'm funny compared to, well, you'll see later. I stand for mayhem!
I know a lot of fucking idiots that think a lot of shit is mean-spirited just because it goes against what they believe. But the relief of comedy is it take things that aren't funny and it allows us to laugh about them for an hour.
We got a purple suit to buy and a gigantic coffin.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Why Are You Laughing? A history of comedy podcast coming to you live from the Vaulted Podcast Studios. And today, I am pleased to introduce to you Chevy Chase, one of the greatest curmudgeons that perhaps we've covered on this show. Very interesting guy, and like me and Matt were just talking before we hit record, maybe one of the most famous guys, certainly comedic actors, through the 70s and 80s, but also a guy that, like, our generation doesn't know as well. Like, I know him from Community is what I mostly know, and I've seen the Vacation movies and stuff like that, but I didn't know of him as the star that he was until eventually it was, like, told to me. You know, like, I never thought of him as that guy because over the years he's been such a pain in the ass to work with that star faded away fairly quickly. But yeah, like I said, we are here in the Vaulted Podcast Studios in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. So check that out. Matt from RI is who you can hit up on Twitter if you want to come down here and record. And blindmike.net is the place that you can get this podcast, the Blind Mike Project, all things Blind Mike related at blindmike.net. If you want to subscribe to the Patreon, we really appreciate it. And you can get Why Are You Laughing episodes a week early, as well as Blind Mike Project a little early, and bonus content as well. So hit up blindmike.net. You can support the show for free there as well, whichever you prefer.
I've been loving the Quincy episodes.
I mean, who hasn't?
It's great.
Really. It's getting us. We're so dangerous that it's getting us kicked off YouTube. People can't handle Jack Klugman.
YouTube is the worst.
It really is. Unless we're back on, in which we love it. It's great.
Yeah, YouTube.
All right. So, yeah, let's get right into Chevy Chase, who, we'll get into his a lot of negatives as we go along here, but I do want to start with some positives. He had an interesting, upbringing. I guess he comes from... his ancestors came over here very early on, and it's like he comes from, I think, well-to-do ancestry, but also his mother was adopted and her parents never acknowledged her in their will or something like that. Like there is an interesting upbringing where I think Chevy was, maybe upper middle class, but also didn't reap some of the benefits that the rest of his family did, that I think left a chip on his shoulder that kind of built the guy that we now know. But he did have, I think, a better upbringing than a lot of the people, like we just talked about, Roseanne last week or whatever. I think he had a better upbringing than a lot of those people and a lot of the people that you see in comedy. I feel like some of his demons might have come later in life, as opposed to his childhood. But he started at National Lampoon. He was on National Lampoon Radio. And it's the kind of humor, I think this defines Chevy Chase pretty well. I think Chevy Chase's humor, we can talk about his difficulty to work with or whatever. I feel like his humor eventually wears on you a little bit, as much as his personality does. But his style of humor where it's kind of, he's awkward and he says inappropriate things at the wrong time and stuff like that. I think eventually... you've heard that, I think the element of surprise is lost a little bit because that's what kind of what he did on National Lampoon. And then obviously when he got SNL, that's, his character was like, I'm Chevy Chase and you're not. It was, he's this kind of arrogant guy, which is difficult to pull off in comedy, unless you really are that guy, I think, So I do think it wears on you because you lose that element of the surprise after a while where you're like, oh, I know that he's going to be the jackass here. And there's also an element that's lost on me just because it's very visual, but everyone says Chevy Chase is the greatest physical actor pretty much of all time.
Without the rest of his body, just his facial expressions is what does it for me.
Yeah, so some of that is lost on me for sure.
Yeah.
But that's, unanimous. If you're talking physical actors... Someone I always think of is Michael Richards. You know, Kramer. Yeah. Kramer's ability to just slide into a room and make you laugh.
Incredible.
And I think that some of that was influenced for sure by Chevy Chase and the early days of SNL. But before I veer too much off track here, where are we starting in my notes with Chevy?
He's on with Carson, I believe. Talking about draft dodging. Oh no! Wait, sorry, not Carson.
Yeah, I think he's with. Well, we'll find out in a second. Yeah. I forget who he's. He might be with Arsenio. I forget. But yeah, early on, a lot of guys. We talked about this with Lenny Bruce as well. You know, there was a lot of homophobia back in the day. But once it meant you could be shipped off to Vietnam, people were very happy. Like, oh, yes, I'm very gay, sir. Yes, I'm terribly gay. So let's hear Chevy talk about weaseling his way out of having to serve.
No, I was actually given a 1A, which is you probably were when we first were in our induction physical.
Which meant you were ripe for
Which meant you were
draft.
right, strong, eloquent, could hold a gun, hurt. And I was still in college, and I had to wait another year, and then I knew that was it. I'd be going in. So I thought, this is not a war that I agree with, which I didn't, and many of us didn't at the time. And with all due respect to those men who went at the time, I felt, no, I don't want to support this, and most certainly don't want to get blown up. And so I went in and answered the same questions that were on the test, the first part of the induction physical, which were, have you ever had, or do you now have, headaches, bedwetting, homosexual tendencies, all of those things? Well, most people answer no. Do you now have, or had? Second time I went in, I realized it also says, or have you ever had? So I marked them all. Bedwetting, even homosexual tendencies, anything. I figured, you know, you're 12, 13, there's probably some homosexual. Who knows? You know, you're doing something in the back room with a friend. You don't know whether it's homosexual. You're just a kid, you know. And it was immediately ushered to this Freudian-like German psychiatrist who said, Mr. Chase, do you like boys? Yeah, I like boys. Do you like girls? Yeah. Incidentally, I'd also not slept for 2 days. I was just drinking coffee, put an entire tube of VO5 in my hair, and did not shower for 2 days. So that it was not a pretty sight, or it wasn't much fun for anybody else in the crowd in front of me because we were all nude. And they gave me a 4F with their blessings. But
well, you worked for it.
I'm not proud of it.
That's all right.
I'm not proud of it.
That's all right.
By the way, that was the long-lived Pat Sajak show. Shame on us for forgetting. The great Pat Sajak had a talk show.
Well, it makes sense that I confused him with Carson.
Yes, yeah, they were both the greats of the 80s.
I totally forget that Pat Sajak had a show.
Yeah, well, so did Chevy, which we'll get to. But yeah, it's just funny to hear guys back in the day, in a time where like that was so taboo. But when you know, Uncle Sam came knocking, yeah, no problem. But anyways, eventually he gets SNL. Chevy, I think, just listening to that clip, because that was the funniest I heard him be. When he says, like, hey, you're 12, 13, who knows? Is it homosexual? I don't know. That's the funniest and most with it I'd heard him be in an interview. I went through a lot of Chevy interviews, and as Johnny Carson will say, you know, has some commentary on Chevy's ad-libbing performance. But I don't think he's great in those spots. And I can't tell if he's intentionally not great and awkward, but, you know, I have to say a lot of the influence for things like, you know, The Office and Parks and Rec did it perfectly, I think, where it's like just a look to the camera or saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. That sort of kind of awkward humor. Those shows did it perfectly, but there are have been a lot of shows since that don't do it as perfectly, or where it kind of, you know, wears on you. I think a lot of the influence from that is Chevy Chase and at least his interview persona. Not so much, like, I think Chevy Chase is hilarious in, like I said, the vacation movies. I know him from Community. I think he's very funny in that. But, like, when he's on a talk show, he's not necessarily great. Mm-hmm. You know, he's not the quick comedic mind that I think a lot of the people that came through SNL were.
Yeah.
But or if we get into SNL, am I missing anything in between?
No.
Okay, so basically, you know, Lorne Michaels heard Chevy on like this National Lampoon radio and things like that. He knew of Chevy Chase and said, you know, we got to have this guy. Chevy was one of the later additions to that first season of SNL, and this comes into play later. But he signed on as a writer. So he was signed on as a writer and was later added to the cast like at the last minute before the season. And then very quickly, it essentially became the Chevy Chase Show. I think like almost all. I think he got hurt and missed a couple episodes or something. But almost all the episodes in season 1 of SNL go live with Chevy saying live from New York at Saturday night. It was pretty much him that said it, whereas now it's a different person essentially every week. You know, early SNL was very focused on Chevy, and I can't think of it, even Eddie Murphy, when Eddie Murphy's essentially like the second cast member in Eddie Murphy seasons is Joe Piscopo. But even then, I don't think the show was as geared towards the Eddie Murphy show as it was when Chevy Chase was on.
Yeah.
Which is pretty wild when you consider also in that cast was Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, Gilda Radner, Jane Curtin. I'm forgetting some big name, I'm sure. But like these monsters that were in that first season, and it still managed to be the Chevy Chase Show.
Was Bill Murray in the first season?
No, he replaced Chevy.
Right.
Which we'll get to. But so Chevy was most known for, obviously did Weekend Update and, coined, and this became a big thing where, Chevy would start the news with, I'm Chevy Chase and you're not. And that became a big thing. And then his sign off, I'm forgetting what it was. Have a good night and a pleasant tomorrow or something like that.
Something along
it was something like that. And that became very well known. So Chevy was the guy people were quoting on SNL the next day or on Monday at work. And he also played the president, which we found now became a big deal, that helped Will Ferrell become huge, Dana Carvey. Like a lot of guys became very big from playing the president on the sitting president on SNL. Chevy obviously was the first one to do that. And he made Gerald Ford into like this klutz. You know what I mean? Like Gerald Ford didn't have similar to Will Ferrell's George Bush and Dana Carvey's George Bush Sr. He made these things about Gerald Ford that simply didn't exist.
Yeah.
But because Chevy played it that way, it became something that was so associated with Gerald Ford. But what's the next clip we have? His Weekend Update?
The face of SNL.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Let's hear that.
It was kind of inevitable. Somebody had to.
Jane Curtin.
And at that time, television really liked people who were easy on the eye. And Chevy certainly was easy on the eye back then. And he was also full of himself. He could present himself in a way that was funny and accessible to a certain degree. And when he entered the room changed, and so he had that. He had that ability. So it made sense that he would be the face. But then the face got a little big. It became this really big face, which ticked a lot of people off because it was, John wanted to be the face and other people wanted to be the face and give us a chance to be the face. And it was difficult for them. So it was tense when that happened.
Yeah, and Belushi, I guess, had a lot of resentment for Chevy Chase, which is funny because evidently Chevy Chase is one of the people that recommended Belushi to Lorne Michaels. So it kind of shows you what an asshole Chevy was to have that guy turn on you, Yeah. And there's an interesting thing, and I think this probably goes for every workplace, not just Hollywood, but there becomes a jealousy for sure. When Chevy is the biggest guy on the show, there's absolutely going to be jealousy. But I do think that if Chevy was this great guy that's always uplifting his cast members and giving people other ideas and trying to bring people into scenes, or even just, off camera is a genuine good guy, I don't think that jealousy is as thick. You know what I mean? And maybe that's not true because if you look at Dane Cook, he seems like a nice, wholesome guy, but people were very jealous of him and hated him. So maybe I'm off on my theory. But I think certainly that jealousy is exaggerated when you are genuinely being an asshole to people.
Sure.
And by all accounts, like all the stories were, a lot of it was coke fueled. Chevy was doing a lot of drugs. But there was also an element of him being genuinely like disrespectful to people and talking down to people, and him very quickly learning that he was the show. Like he knew that it was Chevy Chase's SNL, And don't forget, SNL was not the institution it is now. You know, there's no precedence for SNL being this ensemble thing that a bunch of different people carry, and then you move on and go have a movie career.
Right.
That's never happened before. Now it's just, this is a show that, you know, my fame and my Weekend Update and my skits made famous.
Next season, it's the Chevy Chase Show.
Right. Yeah, right. Which that very well could have happened, actually. If you go back, it could have become the Chevy Chase Show if he stuck around. But I think next we see one of the great sketches in SNL history, right?
Yes, word association.
Yeah, so this is just a little example. Richard Pryor was on SNL in the early days, and this is just an example of what I think is one of the best sketches from Chevy's time here. This is Richard Pryor is looking to get a job at Chevy's company, and they play a little game of word association.
We got.
There's a couple things there. I mean, obviously. The next time Chappelle's on SNL, I don't think they're redoing that sketch. You know?
Imagine him and Chevy Chase. Chappelle and Chevy Chase. Never.
But yeah, so obviously that wouldn't be done now. But there's an interesting also evolution of comedy. And you see this a lot. Impressionist is the best example of this, where back in the day, you know, fucking Rich Little or Frank Gorshin or whoever would just be like, you know, could you imagine if Jack Nicholson and Richard Nixon were in an elevator together? I think it would sound a little something like this. Like you would just shoehorn these scenarios to get your impressions in.
Yeah.
Whereas now the audience is a little more looking for a natural kind of segue, where it is so shoehorned in. The idea that you'd be in a job interview and the interviewer would just start saying slurs and be like, what do you associate this word with? Like, so shoehorned into this sketch because it's funny. And that's just how it was back then. Like if you could figure out a way for something to be funny, you could just put it in a sketch. Yeah, it's, I don't know what I was going to say. I lost my train of thought. Let's just hear the next, the next one is Weekend Update?
So, no, this is leaving SNL.
Oh, okay, yeah. So let me set that up a little bit then. Yeah. So he was on for one season, which, you know, there is a lot of Chevy Chase material for there being one season. You know, like that's probably the most memorable sketch I think Chevy was in. But there's a lot of stuff that has been quoted over the years. Like you forget that he was only there for 1 year. It's pretty crazy. And I also can't think of anyone. How long was Eddie Murphy on SNL? I'm trying to think.
Oh.
It was more than one season, right?
Yeah, I think it was two.
Yeah, it was short, but not as short as Chevy. I don't know if there's anyone that was only on one season and skyrocketed the way Chevy did. But he got lucky in the sense that, like I said, he signed a writer's contract, which was only 1 year. Whereas I think the performers were locked in for 3 years, possibly 2, but I think it was 3. So Chevy took advantage of that. And, you know, he always said it's because his wife didn't want to leave California, which to me, I mean, maybe that played a small factor, but it seems hard to believe that that was the entire reason. It doesn't seem like Chevy's a guy that would be afraid to say, go fuck yourself. So let's see. He's on The Tonight Show, which let's hear. We'll talk about that in a second, but let's just hear him talk to Carson about leaving SNL.
And it was Eddie Murphy was on for 4 seasons.
4 seasons.
And
yeah.
I typed in who was the shortest person, like the shortest tenure on SNL, and it says Rachel Drash at 5 feet.
Okay, well, that doesn't help us, unfortunately.
No, I'll find out.
You've heard all these questions before. Why did you decide to leave Saturday Night Live? You'd been with it 1 year, and it was going great. Did you just get bugged?
I was fired, John.
NBC made another brilliant decision.
The smart move, yeah. Then they ran the Lelaine show. No, I left because it was my prerogative. I had, in fact, a contract which allowed me to leave after a year. I was hired only as a writer, and to this day, I'm almost hardly a writer. But I wanted to get alone, little doggy, and write my own thing,
right,
and get married. And
thank you very much. And you can have a late show and be married also.
Yeah, I understand that.
Possible. I've done that. And, in fact, several times you can do that. Yes. But you said, I thought maybe you quit to get married, but he could have.
No,
both,
there were a lot of reasons. In fact, the major reason was, for those of you at home, was that I was somewhat burnt out. I mean, I was exhausted. It's one of those things that you do every night, but it was once a week, but it was 90 minutes live and trying to turn out odd comedy as much as we could hurt. And I was writing and performing and suddenly picked up on by the press and given a lot of... is there something hanging from my nose, Ed?
No. Do you want something? To hang from your nose? Sure. Certainly.
It's just 2 erasers.
That's right.
So a few interesting things about this interview. One is right there when you hear him say, like, is there something hanging from my nose? That sort of awkward interaction, like he never really gets to the point. He's not answering you seriously. That is his style in these interviews.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about when I say, like, it kind of wears on you. Because there's certain things I was listening for, and I'm like, just get to the point, Chevy. Enough with the shtick.
He's doing everything to get out of the conversation.
Yeah, it's very shticky, and I think that's where it can be annoying, where I think even there have been times in Chevy's career where he's been kidding and genuinely, like, looking for a laugh in response, and people are just like, what an asshole. Why is he behaving like this? Which, believe me, we'll get to some of those examples. But another interesting thing from this interview is, like I said, I just threw this clip in because it was pertinent to what we're talking about, obviously, him leaving SNL. But the other thing was that when Weekend Update really got big, when he started getting recognition for Weekend Update, kind of a natural assumption, because it has sort of that talk show monologue style, you're hitting on the news of the day or the news of the week in that case. So people pretty naturally said, I could see Chevy replacing Carson. And a big story back then was always who's going to replace Johnny. When's Johnny leaving and who's going to replace him? People all love that. Was the hot gossip in late night back then. So a couple things. Naturally, like now, it's, you just naturally see Jimmy Fallon, Seth Meyers, like I'm sure Colin Jost still has some kind of talk show when he leaves SNL. Like it just seems like the kind of natural move. So it makes sense that people would pick up on that. Also, by the way, Chevy correctly has given himself credit for kind of launching a lot of the modern day talk shows that we have. The Daily Show is the best example of the Daily Show essentially is Weekend Update, just in longer form. But, I guess really Lorne Michaels is the one who came up with the format. But, Chevy was a big part of that becoming a successful thing that has now, launched the careers of Colbert and John Oliver and all these, kind of faux political talk shows were born from Chevy Chase. So Chevy started getting a lot of pub as like the next Carson. And Chevy said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to waste my time interviewing celebrities and be stuck in that job forever. And Carson had a response to that. I think it was years later, where he said, well, Chevy Chase couldn't ad-lib a fart after a baked bean dinner. Or some very Carson joke that I remember actually hearing Letterman use that years later in an homage to Carson. But so very long story short, I watched this interview expecting that would come up because Chevy said that in like 75 or 70, like a year before this interview, and it never did. It was very weird. And then even in there, you hear him like try to give Johnny credit. Like, you host this every night. I only do it once a week.
Yeah.
And it's weird. And then I found out that Carson comment didn't come for years. I think when Chevy had his talk show, maybe. I forget exactly when Carson said that. But it wasn't for years until Carson took a dig back at him. And it's a very strange thing in Hollywood where now that would be all over just because 24-hour news cycles and the constant content coming out. But I guess Johnny was such a pro that I guess they brushed it under the rug for the sake of this interview.
Huh.
Another thing that I learned out of this interview is that Chevy had like a HBO special. Or, I'm sorry, it was on NBC. But like it was an hour special that he was promoting. Which it's like, I don't see Chevy doing that. But apparently it did okay.
Yeah.
Or at least it didn't affect his movie career, certainly.
No.
But we also have him talking about the physical aspect of his comedy on SNL, right?
Yep.
How badly did you hurt yourself when you took that fall on the show one night? I know you were out of the show for 2 or 3 weeks. You were doing the Ford thing at the podium. Did you hit the lectern when it went over?
Yes, I badly hurt my podium. We were doing.
Pause right there. That's the shit I'm talking about. Where it's just like, all right, Chevy, I barely hurt my. Okay, the first few times it's funny, but that's what I'm talking about when I say it's just, all right, man. You know, by the time that gets to Dan Harmon in 2009, it's like we've heard it. You know,
the height of the Ford Carter debates, and just a mic, and we were, and I was playing Ford. My great impression of Ford, just nothing to do with him at all. Just an inept man spilling, you know. And Danny Aykroyd, who's on Saturday night doing Carter, and he does, in fact, a brilliant Carter. He actually has a mustache and does a good Carter. And they hadn't padded the podium. Now, the fall I was doing was a very slow fall with the podium for it. It was one of those things where I had a long time to say, no problem here. You know, it was just, and the podium wasn't padded, and I went down on it. And it's the same, really, as falling flat on the floor with no give, nothing to stop the fall. So I was not happy about it.
Did you know it at the time that?
Yeah, I knew I was hurt.
Well?
I wasn't feeling well in the midsection here. I'm just going to open this up. Hope that's not too risque.
No, that's not.
It's a nice tie too. It's banker.
Cute.
Anyway, it wasn't too good. I had some problems, but it's all over now.
Another interesting thing, I think Rogan was the one I heard talk about this, where they were talking about what an asshole Chevy Chase is known as. And I think Rogan brought up, like, I wonder if there's an element of, like, CTE or something, or, like, brain injury. Because he was so physical, like, he was literally, and I think those are the 2 or 3 weeks where he didn't say live from New York on Saturday night. He had to miss shows because he's injuring himself.
Yeah.
You know, so he's literally putting his body out there. Now, I think that's an extreme assumption to make, but it is an interesting element of all that. My other takeaway from that is he did always, a thing I noticed in watching a few interviews with him, as much as a dick as he may have been, you know, off stage, on camera he would always give his castmates credit. Like you hear him say, Aykroyd does a great impression of Jimmy Carter. In another interview that we might even have it later, he calls Aykroyd a genius. You know, so he was complimentary of his fellow castmates in that time. But he got so big, and by all accounts, this hurt his relationship with Lorne Michaels. Like, I think they were friends before, and this severed ties with them a little bit, which we'll get more into. But, you know, not that he didn't burn any bridges because he was such a big star, and he had a thing that a lot of comedians don't have, where he was, like, a very handsome guy. Like, if people think Chevy Chase was a dreamboat back in the day. Which is funny if you look at him now. But, you know, time hurts us all. But he was a good-looking guy who was arrogant, that was able to pull off funny. You know, you were able to believe, despite his arrogance, he could pull off kind of being a schmuck or an asshole. Like in those vacation movies, he is a bit of like a dick to his family, but he is also the joke. Like bad things happen to him. So you're like, oh, okay, you can get on board with it, you know? And you don't see that a lot in comedy, where usually it's more self-deprecating and you have to be the asshole that we all know we're making fun of, you know? So he was able to pull off that attitude pretty well. Like I said, I don't think it worked not on a movie set or TV set, you know? Like I think in interviews it doesn't really work, but I think on, you know, in a role, I think it works very well, or at least he made it work. All right, what do we have next?
This is going to be on Stern. It's Bill Murray after Chevy leaves.
Yeah, so when he left the cast, Bill Murray replaces him in the second season. And it was funny, too, by the way. I was watching a sketch with Belushi, and he says, the young kid we hired this season, Bill Murray. And it's funny to think of like these guys. Like Bill Murray was a young, fresh-faced kid at the time.
That is very funny to hear.
Which you can also see, by the way, the comparison between Murray and Chevy, which we'll hear Tarantino talk about that in a second. But there is a definite, they are the same style of guy. You know, they fit kind of that same mold. So it's almost interesting that they were both famous at that time, because I think their kind of demeanor and everything was so similar. But Chevy comes back to host. He's a big star now in 1978. He comes back to host. The cast has really been shitting on him. And by the way, Bill Murray worked at that National Lampoon Radio as well. I don't know how well they knew each other. But Hollywood was very small back then, and they did kind of run in the same circles for a time. So this is a Chevy on Stern, like Matt said, telling a story about when he came back to host.
Here's what happened. I went to the show. I found out later from Lauren that John, who I'd known for years,
John Belushi,
even before SNL, had been quite kind of jealous about my rise to fame, and maybe for good reason. The fact is that John was brilliant, and by any real standard, he should have been the big star. But there are things that happen. You know, my name is said every week. Nobody can spell his name.
Right.
You know, I'm tall.
It was legendarily known that Belushi was sort of the star in the group, and then you,
Danny, was actually the real
what a brilliant
genius.
guy.
He was the resident genius.
And all of a sudden, Chevy did the Weekend Update. Whatever
and
the
he
reason,
blew up,
you charmed the American public.
Yeah.
You got all
for
the
whatever
articles.
reason.
You became the face of Saturday Night Live.
Okay,
And
so
there was
apparently
jealousy.
this ate a little bit at John, enough so that, as I found out later, John had said things to Bill about me when I'd been on the show that simply hadn't occurred or existed. Everybody knew that.
Right.
But I didn't realize he had said these things. So he'd already worked Bill up a little bit.
Right.
And I went in, I was probably a little full of myself after a year of fame or whatever. I think that Billy probably wanted to knock me down a couple of rungs, you know? And I think he wanted to take me on. And basically, words were said just before the show.
Oh,
when I was supposed to go out in the makeup room. and he got
That
me.
makes it easy.
He got me really pissed. I finally went to his dressing room just before the show and said, and opened the door and said, if you say something like that again, I'm gonna, whatever. And John was there. They were both sitting back in the car, and I realized in that instant it was John, because he gave me a look. It was here's the total instigator is John, which is kind of funny, really.
He was enjoying seeing the fruits of his labor.
Yes.
He laid the groundwork,
but
and here
maybe
it
a
was.
little guilty too, because what happened was Billy jumped up from this couch they were sitting on, lounging on, and charged me at the door. And I immediately got into a fight stance, which is, I boxed a lot, and I didn't. So I had no problem with fights. I was ready to level him, and he was probably ready to scratch me up.
So Chevy went on stage right after that, and it wasn't addressed or anything, which is pretty wild. But it's just funny to think of watching SNL when that just happened. Chevy comes out and has some wacky monologue. But the interesting thing there is you hear Chevy talking about his castmates in a positive light, and you hear him talk about Belushi and say, when you think about it, it's pretty funny that Belushi was the instigator in all this. It's funny that he got us to fight each other. Which comments like that I've heard Chevy make often in a lot of these interviews does make me wonder, is he just being a phony? Or is he in on it more than he lets on? For a guy that's such a notorious grump to acknowledge. Now, granted, this is almost 40 years later, to be fair. But, so, time has healed the wound, perhaps. But for a guy who's a notorious grump like that, to be like, you know what, I see the humor in that. That's interesting. He doesn't seem to fit the character that people would tell you that Chevy is.
Yeah, in that clip, when Chevy is at the end of the show, he's on the stage and he's playing the piano and all the cast is around. Bill Murray walks through the back and waves and just walks off stage.
Right, which makes sense. Yeah. But so Bill became kind of became a huge star at that time as well. Same time as Chevy. And I feel like they're two guys that fit very similar roles. You could see Chevy Chase in Groundhog Day, and you could see Bill Murray in the Vacation movies, and they would both kind of fit. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Maybe not perfectly, but that would make sense. And so this is a clip of Tarantino talking about the similarities that they have and what made them different in Tarantino's mind, which I think is a very interesting point.
Okay, the critics always really preferred Bill Murray movies to Chevy Chase movies. However, it does seem as if the point of all the Bill Murray movies is that he's this kind of hip, cool, curmudgeon, smartass guy who in the last 20 minutes gets a transformation and becomes this nice guy.
Yeah.
And and almost apologizes for who he was the entire movie, the whole rest of the movie before that happens.
Which is interesting because, for as much of an egomaniac as it seemed like Chevy Chase was, that didn't come through on screen. Like, he knew it was funny and didn't need to have redeeming qualities necessarily. He was comfortable with being the asshole, which, that could affect your personal life negatively, certainly. But I think that's where you talk about, like, separating the art from the artist and all that. I think it helps on screen. Like, sometimes to be that guy on camera, you need to have a little bit of that off camera.
Yeah.
Which is why we're in a dangerous place now with knowing so much about people's offstage persona. Like we said, that story with Bill Murray wasn't known for years. And maybe it was known in Hollywood circles or whatever, but the public didn't necessarily know about it when we were watching SNL. Now we would have known during the episode. By the time Weekend Update came on, we would have been like, are they going to address it? Because we heard about it an hour ago,
Yeah, definitely.
The other interesting thing is, Chevy kind of started the model of, like, Chevy was obviously in sketches, but after that, like, Dennis Miller, Norm Macdonald, Seth Meyers, Tina Fey, I think to a lesser extent, but Jost and Michael Che now. The hosts, the Weekend Update hosts aren't even in sketches, really.
No, they're just behind the desk.
Yeah, and like Norm was also in some sketches, but he was the Weekend Update guy. So it kind of, like, Weekend Update became so iconic in large part because of Chevy, or so much so that you didn't need to even really be in sketches, and you were still a major part of SNL.
Right.
All right, what's next?
We have the other half of the Tarantino clip here.
Oh, yeah, let's hear it.
Chevy Chase movies don't play that shit. Chevy Chase is the same supercilious asshole at the end of the movie that he is at the beginning. He never changes in his stuff. He's always like a bit of a dick and is always completely sarcastic. I mean, unless they cast him playing a dope like he is in the vacation movies. But when he's playing like a Chevy character, he's he never apologizes for who he is, stays that way throughout the whole film. And even if there is a slight change, that's not the whole point of the movie.
Yeah.
Is like turning him into a nice cuddly guy.
Yeah, first of all, the reason I went on that whole rant is because after I forgot that clip was 2 parts. And so, like, when I heard it, I was like, it was shorter than I thought. Let me talk about it now, I guess.
Oh, there you go.
I forgot Tarantino explains himself. But, yeah, I think that speaks to, and to be fair to the people making these decisions, the Bill Murray movies were more critically acclaimed, like Tarantino said, because I think that's kind of what people want, is you learn from your lessons. Whereas I think true comedy fans don't give a fuck. Like, if it's funny, it's funny.
Yeah.
And Chevy doesn't need to redeem himself and tell us that he's learned a lesson and things like that. So it's interesting, kind of the perspective Tarantino put on it there, where I wouldn't have even necessarily thought of that, but it's like, oh, that's true, where maybe Chevy was more beloved, because I hear Chevy's name a lot more than Bill Murray among comedians that I like. Say, like, oh, yeah, I loved Chevy Chase when I was a kid, or he was a big influence on me, or whatever. I feel like you hear that less so with Bill Murray, where people have almost gotten exhausted with Bill Murray, where it used to be like, hey, Bill Murray took a fry off my plate and then said this never happened and walked away. Or no one will believe you.
No one will believe you.
No one will believe you, and he walked away. Those stories got exhausting because it's like, oh, he's always that guy? He's always on? Whereas Chevy never seemed to be. He was just an asshole that people didn't like. So are we getting into the Stern stuff now with Chevy?
Before that, we'll talk about his talk show failure.
Oh, boy. I forgot about that. I forgot we had to get into that. Yeah, so his talk show was a true disaster. And it's funny because, like I said, he seemed like such a natural fit in that role. But as we've learned from a couple interviews and things like that, he's an awkward guy. And he doesn't relate to people well, and he doesn't converse with people well. I don't think he's a natural talker. The way Carson and Conan and Letterman, who I would put as like my 3 late night guys, other like Leno never did anything for me. Jon Stewart I like, but I don't even consider him like a late night guy per se. Conan, Letterman, and Carson I think are the standard, and what they were so great at was knowing when to be the focus of the interview and when not to be. Knowing when they had a dud where they had to, kind of ham it up a little bit and really carry things, or knowing when they had Norm Macdonald on, or Rickles, or Charles Grodin, or whoever, and say, okay, let me be the straight man here and let this person kind of just go off.
Right.
And that's what I don't think Chevy was ever able to do. But his perspective on it is it's more realistic than I expected, I think. So this is him talking to Letterman about it.
Here's the way I felt. I was confused about the whole genre of the late night talk show wars, which incidentally, to lose the wars to me is hell. It's like suddenly making in your pants or something. I don't know. It's very, very embarrassing. But in any case,
there's your bailiwick right there. Got a bailiwick in your pants.
Yeah, no. That was a brace of pheasant I was concealing in my trousers. In any case, I think that really all that can be said is that it was my fault. For one thing, I was never on time. I was told. No.
You just weren't punctual? Is that the problem?
Well, no, I wasn't punctual enough. I was told we went on at 11.
Right.
It turns out we taped at something like 5, in the afternoon.
Right away, there's confusion.
Right away. So I get there, and I don't know who the guests, I have this thing, and I'm looking at it, and who? And don't know who they are, so I'm not prepared. And then I would confuse, for instance, I had Neil Simon on, and I thought it was Paul Simon. So
Easy mistake,
because they both have the same hair.
Yeah.
But I remember saying to Neil, you and Artie, you ever going to get back together again?
What does he know?
No idea what I mean.
I think he's kidding there to an extent, but it was interesting to hear him kind of admit, like, it was my fault. Like, I wasn't prepared. He was a big shot at that time, and I think he thought this would be easy. He said he never wanted to do it, and now it's something he's kind of, forced to dip his toe into. Because, particularly once you get into the 90s, his career really dried up to where, he has like a cameo in Dirty Work. And like for those guys, it was a big deal to include him. But for Chevy, it was just like an opportunity to be in something people were watching again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think in part that's because he wears on you a little bit. His comedy, I think, gets old after a while. And it was interesting to hear them have that perspective and say, I didn't take it as seriously as maybe I should have. Now, the other thing I think is interesting is that, he was a big star and kind of naturally fit that role, which makes that such a failure. Like if you look at the Magic Johnson show, which is probably the other biggest failure in talk show history, at least it's like that shouldn't have worked. You know what I mean? It shouldn't have worked and it didn't. You know?
They were just plugging it,
Yeah, like it's funny to go back and listen to Howard Stern goof on the Magic Johnson show and shit like that. But like that never should have worked and it was a colossal failure. The Chevy Chase show should have worked. Like people pegged him as Carson's replacement. He was on Weekend Update. It should have been a fine fit, and it certainly wasn't. It was a disaster that did not last very long either. So
now we're getting into the Howard versus Chevy. This is the Howard Stern portion of Why Are You Laughing?
Yes. So he has a lot of rivalries, by the way. There's a lot of great Chevy Chase stories. I think the rest of the show, more or less, is Chevy being an asshole to people and why he has the reputation that he does. And that starts with Howard Stern. But the Stern one is interesting to me because of the way it developed over time and certain things that happened. Like we heard Chevy on Howard Stern. We already heard that. So spoiler alert. They're friends, I guess. Which speaks to, Howard, I think, more than Chevy. But let's hear how the rivalry started. This is Howard and Robin reacting to Chevy Chase was on Larry King Live and promoting something. And he was caught off mic, I guess, saying this between... Some of it was on air, some of it was not. It was between breaks and wasn't supposed to be heard. So this is them reacting to that.
Well, that Howard Stern is such an ass. I mean, really nothing. Just nothing there. Nothing.
And this happens 30 seconds after he gets off the air with Larry.
And there was already another question in between. It wasn't like right after that he went to commercial.
And this is him on the sideline. And then he just starts, he has this weird, strange, contorted look on his face. And like, I still say he loves me. That's what I maintain. When somebody's that obsessive on you, they love you.
In a weird way, they can't admit it.
They can't admit it. But you know what? I bet you I'd get them to admit it on the phone.
you're funny. He was just funny, Stern.
Mumbly.
Nick Downey looked like Joyce Brothers.
I didn't really even get that comparison that he was making. Morton Downey looked like Joyce Brothers. Yeah. But, so he's talking shit about Stern, obviously, and that's something that 1980s, 1990s Howard Stern did not take too kindly to. There's another clip, right?
Yes.
All right, let's hear that.
Let's go to calls for Chevy Chase. Glasgow, Scotland. Hello.
Am I on the air?
Yes.
Howard Stern.
I don't know who that is. To Pittsburgh. Hello.
Hello.
Is that guy, Howard Stern? Boy, he's an ass. Can't stand him. Go ahead.
I've never seen him. He was on the show once as radio, but have you seen his show?
Yeah, never seen it, but I've heard him on the radio.
And?
He's very funny. He got the brain of an egg timer. Let's go.
Now you're downing
Pause
the
for 1
egg
second.
timer.
Howard's going to react to that in a second, but a quick aside I wanted to throw in there is that Chevy's obviously lying about not knowing who Howard Stern is.
Yeah,
or
of
anything.
course.
Larry King, I believe, 100%.
Yeah.
Because he says, I've never seen him. I mean, he was in here before. Larry King's one of the greatest. I love Larry King. I think he took too much shit. And there's he was on O&A back in the day. Here's your obligatory O&A reference. But they used to goof on him forever about the questions that he asked. Like they would play questions where he was talking to a rape victim who she was attacked as she was bringing groceries into her house. And it's very sad. She goes through this entire horrible story of being attacked. And Larry's follow-up question is, what happened to the food? Asking if she dropped the groceries. And so they ask him about that. They play that for him, and they're like, Larry, what the fuck? And he goes, you see, I think that's a great question. Because no one would ask that. So I just love Larry King, and I just wanted to throw that in real quick. But now let's hear Howard react to Chevy's mean words about him.
Pittsburgh, hello.
Yeah, well, we've all heard the reviews on Invisible Man, so you get the brain of an egg timer, too. In fact, right now, I'm a lot more successful than you are. Seems I'm making people laugh.
Yeah, that, folks, is Howard Stern, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
The Wendy Williams guy, the guy that reacts to people like that, that's Howard Stern, which is why it's funny when you hear him in all these clips. Like in that, the Chevy Chase clip we played earlier with Stern. They're talking about Bill Murray and Belushi, and he's like, oh, they're just the funniest guys. Whereas back in the day, he was jealous of everybody. He never said anyone was funny. He shit on everyone that could even be remotely compared to Stern. He would shit on them, and I think that's the real Howard reacting to that. So it would be brutal. They would call him at home. They would leave messages. They would try to get him on the phone and fuck with him, and they would just brutally insult him. And this also happened to be at a time where you hear Howard there goof on the movie Invisible Man, which I don't think was a huge success. This is a time where Chevy's star is fading a little bit. You know, the vacation movies, how many sequels can you make to that, really? How many sequels to Fletch can you make? These were monster hits, but now that's kind of dying a little bit. And Chevy in the 90s was not the same type of star, which I think happens naturally to a lot of comedic actors. You know, very few guys like Rickles and Rodney are the rare exception of people who are very funny into old age, you know? And Chevy, by the way, is a guy who got famous late. Like, he got famous when he was into his 30s, I think. So his star was dying a little bit. Stern's constantly fucking with him. And I think this next clip is Chevy remembering why that happened, right?
It's them clearing the air.
Yeah, so they get Chevy on the phone to talk about it, and Howard's kind of ready to attack him. And Chevy doesn't quite remember at first, and then does remember why him and Stern had beef with each other.
And it's almost like they resent my success.
Geez, I don't know why I would have said that. If I had never heard you, I don't know why I said it.
Yeah. I never.
Oh, I know why.
Why?
I know why.
Okay.
Because, do you remember when I was shooting Fletch?
Yes.
And that, what was that girl's name?
Julianne Phillips.
Julianne Phillips,
Yeah,
the one who was married to Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, and you called, and, well, I know why now.
Right.
Because, apparently, you called, we were shooting in Astoria, and you called and asked me a bunch of questions about her divorce.
Right.
And at the time, I remember that I didn't know who you were, but I remember that she was, like, crying every day because she was really going through it. You know, it was very hard. And
Hey,
you were very mean.
You know what was weird to me?
What?
She married the guy. She came out with it with a couple of $1 million.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't see. And she's the one who left Springsteen.
Oh yeah, I mean I don't know.
I figured like, hey, what's
I don't
the
know
big deal?
the details. Well, I remember what I don't know whether a couple of $1 million pays for all the whatever the emotions she was going through. But all I know is that I was shooting this movie and I got this call, and you started asking me questions about her sex life or something, and I just felt you were an ass.
Right.
So it's interesting to kind of hear, and this is true of all radio, not all. I'd say maybe 95% of radio wars now, podcast wars, is like they start with something where you are genuinely angry in the moment, but then when you look back at it years later, you're like, why was I pissed about that? Bruce Springsteen's ex-wife? What the fuck was I even mad about? But it's funny to hear Stern would fuck with this guy endlessly, and Chevy remembers like, oh no, I had a reason to be kind of annoyed with you.
Yeah, right.
But the Chevy-Howard relationship is bizarre because they would, like, Chevy would answer, and they would kind of go back and forth and be friendly. And then I guess Chevy gave a toast. Like in this clip that we just heard, they said that they've never met each other. Yet, like in person, obviously. And yet Chevy was at Howard's wedding when he got married to Beth for some reason and gave, I guess, this awkward, uncomfortable speech that Howard hated.
That's weird.
And it was very weird, but it's also like, why was he invited to the wedding?
Yeah.
And then Howard was mad at him for that. And then I think that clip where he played where he was on the show, I think that was well after Howard's wedding. So very, very weird. I don't understand their relationship. I never know if anything with Stern was just a bit that we were all, duped on or what the deal is. But a very strange relationship those two had. Other strange relationships that Chevy had with people that I think are less, more to the point, shall we say. Like when he would go back and host, he hosted SNL a bunch. And one of the times he hosted is when Robert Downey Jr. was in the cast. It was that weird year where it was like Robert Downey Jr. and Anthony Michael Hall and people you would not, I think maybe Michael Keaton, people you would not expect to be on SNL.
Yeah.
Well, Chevy, I could not find Robert Downey Jr. talking about this. I wish there was. I just found like other people gossiping about it. But basically, Chevy went to, the SNL set the week he was hosting and just would lay into Robert Downey Jr. and call him talentless and say he doesn't deserve to be on the show. And then would start insulting him like about his father and say your father's probably in hell looking up at us and shit like that. Weird. It's very weird to say to someone that you don't really know.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if there's backstory with Chevy and his dad or Chevy and Robert Downey Jr. I have no idea what the backstory is there, but it didn't seem like there was one. It seemed like he was just the host that started shitting on him. He would also, berate women writers and shit. We'll get to that in a minute. But, like, he would be really insulting to people in the cast. And that goes back to, is Chevy trying to be funny in those moments? Or is he always an asshole? Or is he an asshole that loses himself? And then when you hear him tell these stories where he's like, gee, why was I mad at you? Where that's real, where, like, his memory is just shot for whatever reason. And he's like, fuck, did I do that? Where he has almost this multiple personality, like, the kind of the duality of Chevy Chase, where sometimes he's in a good mood and he's a fun guy, and other times he is not.
Yeah. I think that's probably it.
Yeah.
That's where I tend to think.
Another example, is the next one Rob Hubel?
Yes.
Yeah, so here's another example of that. And by the way, Rob Hubel, type of guy, you'll know him when we play the clip. You'll be like, oh, I know that guy. But you wouldn't necessarily know him by seeing him. He was in I Love You, Man. My favorite thing that he's done is Human Giant with Aziz and Paul Scheer. But like when you see him, you're like, oh, he's a funny guy. I know Rob Hubel. But you can tell every role he's in, that's definitely like a Chevy Chase type, where he's good at being like the arrogant guy that doesn't really know it, saying, the inappropriate thing and being, what did I say? He's very good at being that type of guy. So Rob Hubel had the opportunity to meet Chevy Chase. And here's we might have to put Larry King in the pantheon of people we mention every week.
Yeah.
Because he has a great role this week. But here's Larry King talking to Rob Hubel about meeting Chevy Chase.
I understand Chevy Chase is one of your heroes, and you had a surprising first encounter with him.
I did. I grew up a huge Chevy Chase fan. I mean, I really wanted to be Chevy Chase, and all those movies like Fletch and Caddyshack.
He even looked a little like him.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. He was my guy. And then the first time I met him, This was at that theater at Upright Citizens Brigade. He was backstage, and I don't ever get starstruck. I mean, you've met everyone in the world, but you know, every now and then I still meet someone, and for me, Chevy Chase just like, I was just blown away. He was just like my comedy hero. So I went up to him, and he was talking to a friend of mine backstage, and I said, Chevy, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Rob Hubel. And he slapped me across the face, like really hard. So hard that I saw red. Like my first instinct was like, I'm gonna punch Chevy Chase. And you know, of course I didn't. And then he said something, I can't remember what it was. He made some sort of little joke like, can't you see I'm talking to someone, or something like that. He was trying to be funny, and it was just one of those things that it wasn't funny to me. Maybe it was funny to him, but
it's not funny.
It wasn't funny. It wasn't funny. And
that's, I mean, you even hear Rob Hubel there wrestling with the same thing we were talking about, where it's like,
Yeah.
Is he trying to be funny? I don't get it.
That's so weird. That's such a weird story.
So that's the bizarre thing. Like, even while the Robert Downey Jr. story is wild, that you would say that to someone, like your father's in hell looking up at us or whatever the fuck he's.
Yeah.
That's wild to say to someone. But I think we can all at least relate to being in a shitty mood and throwing out something where later you're like, I wish I didn't fucking. Why did I say? I was just being an asshole.
Yeah. How about a physical attack?
Everyone can relate to saying something shitty. I can't imagine being in a mindset where I'm like, oh, slapping this person that I don't know, just a stranger walking up to me, that'll be hilarious.
Yeah, right.
You know, and so it's a weird thing. We're going through this episode. I don't know if Chevy Chase just had a bizarre sense of humor that didn't always work. Is a guy that was, you know, did a lot of coke and his brain was just rattled a little bit. Such an egomaniac and so successful and, you know, wealthy that he lost touch with just humanity and people, like how to behave. I don't know what it is. I don't know which one it is with Chevy Chase, because you see moments where he knows how to act and where he can be humble and shows humility and things. You know, it's strange. He's a very bizarre case that at least going through this episode I have not figured out, you know.
Yeah.
So another one of those examples is supposedly he's banned. The legend is he's banned from SNL. That he went back to host in 1997 and he was banned. And then you look and you see, well, he was on again in 97. He was on Weekend Update a couple times. He was at the 40th anniversary. He was at the 25th anniversary, which I believe was after 97. You know, so he's participated in these things where you're like, he's not banned. I'm looking at him on SNL. He's not banned.
Yeah, right.
You know, so then people have changed it to he was banned from hosting. Like Lorne Michaels will never let him host again. And it's like, well, that's a weird thing, because why would you allow him? If he's so dangerous that he's not allowed to host, why would you allow him in the building at all?
Right.
So that's a weird thing that I'm not.
Strange.
And Lorne Michaels has said it's ridiculous. He said, oh, that's ridiculous. Why would we ban Chevy Chase? So I don't know where that comes from that he's banned, but he hasn't hosted since 97. But a large part of that might be is there a reason that he would have hosted since 97? I mean, Community was on the verge of being canceled every year that he was on it. So
yeah,
I don't know how big a star he's been since then.
How many times has he hosted? Does he have the 5? Is he in the 5-time club?
Yeah, because one of the times is when he welcomes Justin Timberlake, I think, to the 5-timers
Right.
club.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
And so I would assume that's the only reason why they would have him back is for like
things like that.
legacy things.
Yeah, where 40 the anniversaries and shit like that. Yeah. So, anyways, the reason he's supposedly banned is that there's this story. And again, it's weird. I wish I could find Sherry O'Terry. I'm sure Sherry O'Terry has talked about it because she doesn't have much else she's promoting these days. You know, she must be somewhere giving that interview. But I couldn't find her talking about it, unfortunately. But there's a weird incident where Chevy got like physical with her and like pushed her head or something like that, and then would berate the female writers and talk all sorts of shit, particularly like, you know, they would say misogynistic shit that Chevy said, I guess, targeted at women mostly. As we've seen, he'll target men as well. But in this case, I think it was specifically the women on the writing staff and Sherry O'Terry. So just a weird story of him being, it goes beyond being an asshole. You know what I mean? Like the Rob Hubel story and the Sherry O'Terry story are, I think, way beyond him saying shitty things about Robert Downey's father.
Yeah.
You know, like that's a totally separate category in my mind. So very weird. And then people eventually got fed up with it entirely. Is that where we are with Community?
Yes.
Yeah. So nothing really going on in Chevy's career until 2009 when they brought him back in the show Community, which makes a lot of sense. This was in my opinion, the perfect role for Chevy Chase. And if you go back and watch the first episode of Community, I don't know that it was always the plan to make Pierce Hawthorne the character that he was. But as it went on, you see him be this out-of-touch, racist grump that is difficult to deal with and that the rest of the show constantly wants to cut out of their group.
Yeah.
I don't know where Dan Harmon came up with that character, but I do feel like it was developed more as the show went on.
Yeah.
So there were moments, and I've heard Joel McHale talk about this. And by the way, the cast of Community I think is hilarious. Gillian Jacobs and Allison Brie I think are very funny. Yvette Nicole Brown was perfect in the role that she was in. Chevy obviously is very funny. Donald Glover I think might be the most talented human being in America, if you're just talking about things he's successful in.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, Abed Nadir, Danny Pudi's character, I thought should have won several Emmys. Like, I think that was a brilliant character. And I thought he played, like, just a weird autistic kid very well.
Yeah.
So I think it's a brilliant show with a very funny cast. Chevy thought otherwise. And like I said, his character was an out-of-touch guy. Chevy looked at it and didn't get it. It was kind of the way, like, if you hear the Always Sunny guys talk about when Danny DeVito kind of started on the show, he'd be like, there were certain things he just didn't get.
Yeah.
Like, I don't get you kids now. Like, I don't get why you think this is funny. There was a lot of that with Chevy Chase, but he was much more aggressive and blunt about it, I think, than DeVito ever was. So what you got was an uncomfortable on-set environment. And some of those stories were funny, and I guess some of them were a little more serious. So we'll hear the funny one with Dan Harmon before we get into the other one. I guess this takes place at like a rap party or something. Well, Dan,
I have the one clip.
Yeah. So Dan Harmon will explain it.
Was like what had happened is at the rap party after a season that was very contentious. I made the joke. I kind of like the crew, like I thought I was being like a white knight to the crew at the rap party and saying, okay, before we play the gag reel and I'll go home, like, I'm your boss, you can't get fired, so everybody on the count of three just say, go ahead and say, fuck you, Chevy. And everybody very much participated.
There could literally be a series of just Chevy Chase stories, just animating them and then cutting to live action. I mean, the guy is a fucking legend.
Yeah.
He's a legend. The stories of this guy.
So he was like, he left when I did that, and there was this whole thing about, in front of my wife and kids. Well, his kids are 48. Like but like he.
Like middle-aged children.
How do I explain to my children?
He's got a colostomy bag. How could you do that in front of my child?
Exactly. You think 48 years in, they're confused as to whether or not their dad is an asshole?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was my defense. I was like, they know him.
Right.
Like they've had to work with him longer than anybody.
So Dan, in that, he's on Jim and Sam there, and Dan Harmon goes on to say, I was wrong in that moment. He goes, that wasn't right to do. Even just if his family wasn't there, it's not right to, just fucking berate one of your cast members like that in front of the entire crew. It's disrespectful. But like he said, everyone was very much in on that, and they all were feeling what Dan Harmon was feeling. And there's also something where Dan Harmon played his voicemail, I think, at this rap party, like a voicemail of Chevy being an asshole. And so, like Dan Harmon said, he was wrong, but there was a lot of anger and tension built up. So what happened there was that Community was always on the verge of being canceled. It wasn't like a successful sitcom. It had a cult following, and then I can't even say was more of a, like, often with these cultish shows, you hear like, oh, it really took off on streaming services. I don't even think Community had that sort of a run, where it's always been kind of this underground show. And I think maybe the last few seasons, not even the last few, but season 4 really hurt it. And that's where Chevy really fucked up the show, where he got Dan Harmon ousted for season 4. He complained about Dan Harmon so much that he got him fired from his own show. And season 4 sucked to the point where in the show, like the show itself was very meta, and within the show in later seasons, they would refer to season 4 as the gas leak year, where they said there was like a gas leak in the school and none of them can remember it.
Yeah.
because it sucked so bad and the fans didn't like it and everything. So Chevy would say, like, he didn't get the show, and he would constantly complain about the script and say it wasn't funny. And I guess at times he would specifically focus on Donald Glover and tell Donald Glover that the only reason you have this role, or the only reason people think you're funny, is because you're black, which is a very weird insult.
Yeah.
Particularly to Donald Glover, who, I mean, has a successful stand-up special, wrote on 30 Rock, then after this show went on to create Atlanta. Like his won Emmys.
A successful music career as well.
A wildly successful. The idea that Donald Glover isn't talented is just delusional.
Yeah.
Like he might be the most multi-talented guy there is.
Yeah.
You know, so it's crazy to have that thought. And I guess, and this goes back to, does Chevy think he's being funny here? Or are these his real thoughts and how he behaves? Because I guess he would just call Donald Glover the N-word constantly on set.
That's crazy.
It's wild. And this is 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
You know, and so I get, and Donald Glover like addressed it a little, has never really talked about it. Joel McHale, I've heard address it in a couple interviews, and Joel's perspective on it was like, Chevy was very difficult to work with, but at times he wasn't. You know, like at times he was a fun guy and he's a legend that knows comedy and everything. But when he was in a mood, you didn't want to fucking deal with him.
I gotta imagine there's something undiagnosed there. And
There's
I'm not
gotta
a
be.
doctor.
No,
but
there's gotta be.
But like all the evidence is here from all the clips we've shown today is like, I think he just has rough patches.
Yeah, there's guys that lack self-awareness and that comes out in different ways. And I think, you know, like we, on the Blind Mike Project, we like to make fun of guys like Tom Myers, who completely lack self-awareness.
That's an understatement.
Right. But Tom Myers lacks self-awareness in his performing. Like, he shouldn't be doing comedy.
Yeah.
Whereas Chevy Chase is a funny guy. The self-awareness that he lacks is social, so we see less of it. So he almost doesn't really have to confront, because he was so successful, he never really had to confront his behavior, I don't think. You know, and now he's an 80-year-old guy. So 80-year-old guy, so he's not going to change, you know?
Yeah, no.
So very weird. Like you said, I think there's an undiagnosed thing, something wrong with Chevy. And I don't know if it's drug-related. I don't know if it's taking poundings to the head comedically. I don't know if it was something in his upbringing. Like most people, I'm sure it's a mix of all of those. But whatever it is, a notorious asshole. Dan Harmon tried to give him a comeback, and he kind of squandered it. He was brilliant on the show. I thought he was hilariously funny in that show. But, you know, now we likely won't hear from him again. He's an 80-year-old guy. How many roles are there going to be left for him?
Yeah, not many.
So, a wild career. As far as influence, like we said, there's a tremendous amount of influence. And I don't think there's anything I would have had Chevy do, because I think he kind of tried everything. You know, he tried being a late-night talk show host, and it failed miserably. So it's like, would he have been good as the wacky dad on a sitcom? I don't know. I think he found his perfect role in a sitcom, and he didn't want to do it. So, you know, he lived his life the way he wanted, I guess. There's a lot of great success, and there's a lot of weird, bizarre failures to it. So, you know, think of Chevy Chase however you want. We're just, do your own research, as I say on More on Money. You know, looking at Chevy however you want. And judge his legacy that way. But definitely a weird guy and a fascinating guy, for sure, I think. But I don't know. Any other final thoughts on Chevy?
No, it's funny when you see the whole picture together, like all these clips across his career.
Yeah, very weird.
You kind of like, you see a lot of trend, like a lot of similarities in a lot of the clips.
Yeah.
And kind of like trending things. So.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening to this episode for free, then we appreciate it. If you want to keep supporting the show for free, other ways you can do that: leave a 5-star review, share it, tell your friends, whatever, that we do a fun little podcast here. Go subscribe to the YouTube. We need those numbers up as well. Hopefully we're back on YouTube now. Like and comment there. All that helps the algorithm. And if you really like the show and you can't wait for episodes to come out, go to blindmike.net. That's where you can find all those links for the free show, but you can also find links to our Patreon and merchandise. You can sign up for the Patreon there, and if you're an executive gearhead or higher, you get these episodes a week early. Another thing I should mention is, too, if you subscribe for the year, you save a few bucks. You get 2 months free. So do that if you'd like as well. And go to Vaulted Podcasts, like we said. If you're recording anything, video or audio, check out Vaulted Podcasts in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Whether you're in the area here or I'd say it's worth a drive. So hit up Matt from RI on Twitter.
Yes.
And that's pretty much it. We will talk. Next week is the original Kings of Comedy. So we will talk to you guys then on Why Are You Laughing?